famous bank fraud, wherein 12,000 crore, 12,000 involved at least 6 banks. The public sector banks, they lost at least around 227 billion to the bank frauds. The scam that was happening for around more than 7 years, that came into light only when few things happened. So a huge amount of money being involved in such risks, and it been coming out in picture after 7 years, that was a huge risk to the government and everyone involved, right? So what was happening is, there were letter of undertaking which were issued by bank officials on behalf of the bank, and which served as a purpose of bank guarantee. So whenever you want to take loan or want to lend money from banks, you always give or share some guarantee with banks that would help as a collateral for banks to give you money, right? So now these letter of undertakings, these were being issued unauthentically, and people were raising money from banks without any collateral, without any guarantee to the bank that whether they would be paying it back or not. So when it actually came into light, the bank was expected to pay the dues in just next few months. That was happening, and bank was then expected to pay the whole money in next few months. That was a huge risk to the bank. And this particular scam, this involved basically banking sector, jewelry sector, and the insurance sector. So these were the major sectors that it has affected. So what has actually happened? So two bank officials had been raising letter of credit for a long time to a firm without any collateral. So collateral is basically a guarantee that without which you won't be getting money from bank. So obviously it shows the loopholes in the auditing process of bank that led to the fraud. There was no auditing purpose due to which others could see that people were lending money unauthentically, right? And of course it shows the lack of trust, responsibility, and transparency in the overall functionality of the system. So the internal banking system is not systematic, and it's prone to fraudulent activities. So you are lending money and there is no process as to who is lending money, to whom it's lending money, and whether you have any guarantee or not corresponding to it. So this was basically involving international banks as well, and the Indian banks, they communicate with international banks using a system called SWIFT. So SWIFT messaging system, it shows that it was not being monitored properly, right? So what are the flaws that you see in this whole case study? Like, there are multiple parties involved, there are multiple things happening around, and it came into light after 7 years. Where was the major flaw in the whole system? Anyone?
So there were no agencies who were checking this. I mean, there was no check and balance on either side.
Yeah.
Regulatory checks were missing.
Sorry?
Regulatory checks for this business was missing.
Yeah, sort of same thing. Like, there was no auditing of the system, right?
So the control was in a very within a very handful of people.
Correct. So there were just two officials who were controlling the system and then lending out the money. As simple as. Cool. Anything else? Yeah. Okay. So yeah, how blockchain could have been a savior. So obviously, I'll not go into details of how blockchain could have been beneficial here, but we'll just talk about a few terms over here, which would help us understanding what blockchain is and how it could have been a savior for us in case we would have, this whole system would have been using blockchain, right? So decentralized. We all have seen that right now the control was just for two people, right? Two people were controlling who will be lending money, to whom it would be lending money, and how the whole flow of transactions would be taking place, right? So decentralized is totally opposite of centralized. The decision-making part, that would be distributed across various nodes, and it would be the decision would be taken when as a sum of the whole group, right? The next is transparent. So the whole process of dispersal it was not known to the other officials of the bank. The whole bank didn't knew that there was actually any transactions which was lending huge billions and millions of money to some diamond merchant or something, right? So the transparent is we know what exactly is taking place in the system and how it is taking place, right? Immutable. So you right now what you were doing is you were changing changing the way the system works. Unauthentically you were issuing letter of undertaking without any collateral. That means you were hindering the actual process of the bank, right? So immutable is you do not hamper with the processes that it actually should be doing, right? The next thing is verifiable. Verifiable, at any point in time, you should be able to verify whether the things that are being done, they are correct or they have been hampered with. So that is more or less it. And secure, of course, there was huge amount of money involved and people had their money in the banks as well. So in a way, it was affecting the people's money as well. Yeah.
So we have seen that we need all of these things for an application to run, or not even an application, but a system to run properly without a central network. You need something underneath it, correct? So blockchain is one implementation that allows you to give that, to move from that central authority and have a decentralized way of doing things. So how blockchain works is, so blockchain is an implementation of a distributed ledger technology. What that means is, so you can think about ledger as a record of all your transactions or all your changes or all your state changes that you have done over a period of time. So a record of that is distributed to all the members or all the relevant stakeholders of that system, and then that does not lie within one central authority. So when that happens, that distributed ledger becomes something that can be verified at each and every layer. So again, that every member has a complete copy of that ledger, which also means that it can be thought of as a single shared ledger, shared across all the members. Then everything you do on a blockchain is basically called a transaction per se. And what that means is that transaction, you can verify that transaction because it has a unique timestamp and a cryptographic signature or algorithm associated with it. So that makes it a verified transaction, and if someone is making a transaction, then it is associated with that person making the transaction because it associates it with the cryptographic signature of that person. So it binds it to that, and they cannot deny it at a later stage that we did not do it or something like that. And then when we say that we need something immutable or something which we cannot delete, so if you think that at a central level, if you are controlling your data, then at any point you can delete data or you can play with it and others wouldn't know about it. So we need something which you cannot remove it entirely from the system. And now that you have a distributed ledger, so it would be very difficult for you to, if you want to delete something from everywhere, then you need to get a verification or say majority vote from everyone saying that this needs to go, and that never happens. So that's why we say that.
So the case when data is used or not valid data, we're still keeping it and creating inventory of junk data.
So, not exactly junk data, because when you write that data on a network, that has to be verified by everyone. So if we say it's junk, then at least 50% of the people in the network has said that it is a valid data. So even if it could be junk for the rest, say 20% would be calling it junk, but if 80% people say that it's a valid data, then it has to be on the network. So it could be thought of as where everyone has a say in saying that what that data means, and not just one person saying this is valid or this is junk. So how this immutability works is that everything that we store.
So does it eliminate all the reconciliation process because you are not centralizing the data?
Yeah.
Everybody has a copy of data.
Yes.
Right? And authentic data, so the firms which are just doing reconciliation data between two counterparties, does it go away with blockchain?
I can.
So there are two parties who are doing business and
Yes.
transferring data to each other, right? Now it's decentralized, everybody has a copy of it,
Yeah.
right? Both the part of the business, so they themselves can reconcile data if there is not any break in that, right?
Yeah.
So there are a lot of process nowadays or legacy systems which are reconciling, and we're doing a lot of work to reconcile both the part of transaction from both sides of the business. That will go away, or what will happen after?
I think reconstruction really doesn't happen in blockchain. If there's any change which two parties believe there has to be, they have to actually update certain thing, and that also is applied as the next iteration. It's not that they change anything. Any change that you do becomes a new entry in that chain.
So you can think of it as a state change process wherein you cannot go back or revert your previous state, but you can append something new to update that state. And that needs relevant permission by all the stakeholders in your network.
Like
or something like
everyone
that.
who is having the ledger will have to actually verify, and they will also need to have a copy of that change.
Right, so today the ledger, if I have ledger of my company, right, I
Right.
keep in my system.
Right.
And if I'm doing business with company B,
Right.
they have their own ledger system.
Right.
So both of us have our own ledger system. So are we saying that we are sharing the copy of that transaction on the credit or debit side?
If both those counterparties have to be on the same network and to share something via blockchain, then they have to have a common.
So blockchain is enabling both the parties to share each other data.
Yeah.
Then the constitutional reconciliation goes away because both the parties have both sides of the transaction copied and verified by you. each other.
Logically, in financial, if I say yes, this is one of the fantastic uses where we can get rid of the transactions.
So I'm just asking if these guys have some example of financial domain where security is a big concern.
Yeah,
Right?
so
Any investment bank case studies or
exactly, we
people
have one. We're just getting into it. We obviously we cannot use this exact use case in banking when you want to share something privately, like a transaction. If I'm paying something to Navdeep, of those sort, we have a different flavor of blockchain in that case. We have that section also covered.
So
But
this
yeah.
is basically a concept that we can basically build on top of this to share what not to share across. But then the main idea is that everyone at any given point, the stakeholders in any transaction can verify that transaction.
And private blockchain is the answer probably.
Yeah.
I think that is there in the.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I guess that would come up
Yeah.
once we
Yeah.
go into more details.
So what you can think of a transaction. So when we say blockchain, so the block part of it is basically a collection of the transaction or any state change that you do on the blockchain. So we create a group of these blocks and we chain them. So how the chaining works is, for example, I've written a block on the blockchain. So I need to write more transaction onto it. I'll club those transactions. I'll create a new block and I'll link that block to my previous block. So in that case, for example, there are some transactions in block 2 and then I need to write a new block. So block 3 comes up and it would append itself to the latest block of the blockchain currently. So this block would have the hash of its data as well as the hash of the previous block. So this is why it makes it very difficult for someone to go back or say if they want to change something in block number 2. So it would be very difficult for them because they have to modulate all the forthcoming blocks along the way as they also contain the same hash and then convince all the rest of the members that this was the block. That would be a very problematic situation to do. So hence we say that it would be very secure in case we have this in place.
For such kind of scam to happen in blockchain, at least 51% of the people who are actually holding the ledger
Yeah.
have to do exactly the same mutation that is
Yes.
that would cause the other 49% to believe that they had the bad version.
Yeah. So basically,
Yeah,
if you can, so if you want to compromise blockchain, you would say that if 50% or 51% of the blockchain is compromised, then it would be compromised.
Right.
So that is why we want to. So for keeping it secure, the more the members join the network, the more secure it is. So,
Okay, let's talk about Ethereum. So, Ethereum is one of the most popular implementation of blockchain. Blockchain is a technology, like it's a fundamental idea, and Ethereum and Bitcoin, they are an implementation of that. So first of all, Ethereum is an open source and public implementation, so like that's why it's very popular. So what's residing the core of Ethereum is something called the Ethereum Virtual Machine. So that's basically a software which allows the entire Ethereum network to connect. So whichever machine is running the Ethereum virtual machine, we'll say that that is a Ethereum client, and that can be connected to other Ethereum pairs. Like we talked about that also. Ethereum has a native cryptocurrency called Ether. So because it's a cryptocurrency, so it obviously allows token exchanges. Like if I want to buy something on Ethereum network, I'll just directly, like instead of giving rupees or a hard currency, I'll just say that I send you these many tokens and you do that for me. But that's not the only use case for Ethereum. Like one of the main reason why Ethereum is very popular is because it allows, like Navdeep just talked about transaction. Transaction is basically saying that I will do this thing, like I'll send this amount of money to you, something like that, wrap that up into some string and then just send that along. So what basically that means is that just like Ethereum allows me to send tokens, it allows me to send operations also. And that's why we are going to discuss that in the tab hands-on today. So whenever you want to model a real world entity, like a bank transaction like Sir mentioned, so that is allowed and that's possible in Ethereum because Ethereum virtual machine is capable of understanding these bytecodes and these strings. And we do that from something called a smart contract. We'll look at the smart contracts later on, but it's basically like a set of instructions which we write, something like which we use to write normal programming languages. So it's just like instruction set which we pass along in the transaction. It's one of the basic idea behind Ethereum is that it's a distributed network and it's public also. So and it is a peer-to-peer network. So if you have n peers connected in Ethereum network, then you will have to be connected with every other node. And if you are running the main Ethereum network, then it is on internet, so anybody can connect. Like if I today, if I want to buy Ether, or like if I want to send an Ether from Ether is the cryptocurrency we just talked about it, then I have to be connected to internet for that. And it is only possible because Ethereum is a permissionless network. Anybody can join the Ethereum network at any point of time. Any machine which is part of the Ethereum network is called node. We're going to use the word node a lot. That's why we're mentioning it. Any machine can be part of the Ethereum network. You just need to run an Ethereum client. There are multiple versions and flavors of Ethereum client available. Behind the scenes, everyone does the same things. So the one which we're going to use and which is available in the setup is Go Ethereum or Geth. That's a Go-based implementation of Ethereum client. So since we're talking about nodes, there are two main type of nodes. First is full node. So like we just talked that every stakeholder or the node in Ethereum has to have the entire data. So these are full nodes. So full nodes will have the entire history of your Ethereum blockchain. And because it's a chain of blocks blockchain, so it's just like a if you look at the data, it will be like all the blocks which you have from the 0th block to the last block, and they are keeping on like they are keeping on adding new blocks every second. So it's like something in terabytes now, the main Ethereum network. Obviously, we're talking about the main Ethereum network, but Ethereum is designed in such a way that you can start your own Ethereum network at any point of time. Like we can establish one Ethereum network right now with all the laptops which we have. That can also be one network, but obviously that won't be that large. The size would be very small. The second one is lightweight node. Lightweight node is also Ethereum node, but it does not have the entire history of the blockchain. So it has only a subset of nodes. So it's like a lighter version. Why do we need lightweight node? Is like there are some operations in Ethereum which in which you don't want to you want to identify whether the blocks are valid or not. So all I want is just to send some token to Navdeep or Manali. Like I don't care. I just delegate this responsibility to someone else to verify whether this transaction is valid or not. all I get is just I'll be able to send some token to her or do some other operation. So that's why lightweight node is useful in that case.
Can you please explain lightweight a bit more?
Yeah, I think these are this is the only difference between full node and light node. There's a prerequisite for we're going to introduce mining a little. So in that case we use full nodes. But light node is just like if I want to start, if I don't want to download the entire network and I just want to join the Ethereum network. In that case, I'll just boot up my Ethereum network and say that I'm a lightweight node. So it will restrict, it won't give me all the features which a full node will have, but yeah, it would be good enough for me. Given my use case, I just want to connect to Ethereum network, and it's probably a good idea to start with a lightweight node.
So basically each node, they can choose not to be a full node. They can if they don't want the extra space to be spent for something they would not use, they don't want to worry about if everything is verified or not. They choose to just keep the current copy of the blocks and not the previous blocks. So that is.
But don't you think that the 51% thing will be compromised in that way?
So in that case, so the concept of lightweight node is that they rely on some other full node would do the verification for them. They need not. So there might be many nodes in the network. Not every node would be doing the verification or the purpose or the validation across the network. Some nodes would just be there to do their transaction. So they rely on the other nodes to do that.
Yeah, it's the network's responsibility to maintain the this 51% thing. Like if you can start few light nodes, but obviously you cannot say that everyone would be lightweight node, then binding would stop. And we'll look into it, like if that is the case, then the entire network would stop, because like that's the main criteria to add new blocks. So you need some mechanism for that. Let's see the difference between decentralized and distributed. So what we're talking about is decentralization. So decentralization is not only the infrastructure part of it, like not only replicating the entire data into multiple nodes. It has a political aspect also. Like it should not be only one organization or one person's or entity's responsibility to take decisions. Like in the bank case which we were talking, why that happened was because there was only few people who were taking responsibilities for allocating this. So it was like somebody mentioned the centralization, that nobody else was doing that. So the part of the reason was because everything was centralized. Nobody else didn't have enough power to basically take part in that decision, whether this is a valid letter of credit or not, something like that. And distributed means it's just like replicating something. Maybe it can be a database or it can be your code also. Like you have multiple copy of your APIs running at the same time. Similarly, you have multiple databases running in different availability zones. That is distribution. And obviously, if you look into it from infrastructure perspective, decentralization is a subset of distributed. Like if you are making a decentralized application, then obviously it has to be distributed. We have the hands-on exercise which we have given, that is also a small decentralized application.
Now that we have talked about how the network looks like, and so the point comes in, how do you want to use a network? Me as a person, if I want to join a blockchain network, I have a node set up. Say I have a node, now I want to do a transaction. So one thing that we mentioned for a transaction was that we need it to be a valid transaction. What that means is that it has to have a valid signature. Now, how that signature comes in, like if anyone can do any transaction, that would be very difficult to identify where that transaction came from. So there needs to be an owner for any transaction. So for that, we need an account. So account is basically your identity on that network. That doesn't necessarily relate to the node you are doing that transaction from, but you can have a same account on all the nodes and do your transaction. The only thing is you need your password for that account. So the account can be thought of as a private public key pair, wherein each transaction that you do is signed with that private key, which can be verified with your public key that it came from you, basically. So that is about accounts. And then accounts, as we mentioned, that Ethereum not only provides the capability to transfer your money, but also to execute instructions on the network. So for that we have special accounts which are called contracts accounts. Those are the accounts that we deploy on the network, and they can be thought of as a set of instructions that I've defined a set of instructions, I've put it on the network. So I have a hash corresponding to that set of instructions. Now that hash can be thought of as a contract address which I can use to perform those set of instructions as and when required. So that is about accounts. And then each account has some state associated with it. For example, how many ethers I have in my account, or if it's a contract account, then what is the state of each of the variable in that set of instructions. So each account is associated with a state, and that state is replicated on the network. So each node knows what is the state of each account. If I'm deducting some amount, if I'm sending some amount to Himanshu's account, then each node can verify that I can't do that because I don't have sufficient balance or something like that. So it is necessary to maintain the state of the accounts in the network. So yeah, the transaction or anything that you do on your Ethereum network, basically any state transfer, any data transfer, or any you can say ether transfer that you do on the network is basically a transaction. It can also include execution of code that you have already sent, and then when I say that you put on a code on the network, a set of instructions that you also write on the network is also a transaction. So anything that you are doing is a transaction, basically. And as I mentioned, that each transaction needs to come from an account that would sign it, and that would be validated when it goes out. And a set of these transactions basically makes a block in the network. Now, with this current setup, do you see any issue? Correct. If anyone can join the network, for example, if I talk about the public Ethereum network, if anyone has the ability to join the network or to deploy any set of instructions which can be executed on the network, do you see a problem in that? What if I put in a malicious code that would ruin everyone's machine, everyone when trying to execute it? Or what if I make a huge a while code or a iteration that never ends, a loop basically that never ends? So we need to avoid that. So for that we have a concept of gas in our system. So what gas is, you can think of it as a unit that measures how much computation your transaction is consuming. So each instruction that gets executed has some gas associated with it. So that is so anything that you want to execute on the network, you have to pay a price for it, and that is calculated with the gas associated with it. So if I say that my piece of transaction that I'm trying to put on the network has 5 print statements, say, and that would cost me 5 gas, and then I have to pay a price so that would go into the network, and I can choose that price, that gas price. That is not what is given by the network. I can choose to have that, how much I'm willing to pay for that. Why would I want to spend more on my transaction? I can choose to have lower gas price in my case, or higher. Why would I want to, or like, why do I even have that option? Why do I want to spend more? So there's a use case for that as well. So we'll talk about why would you want a higher gas price, but that would come in the next slides. So as I mentioned that with each transaction you can also associate what gas limit is to be gone. So the network also has a specific gas limit that at the network level you specify that no transaction would exceed this limit, but at each transaction also you can specify that I don't want to spend more than this. So you have a gas limit and a gas price associated with each of your transactions.
So these prices are available, like somebody wants to check.
So whenever you want to write a transaction onto the network, you say that I want to spend this. So that is something that is coming from you. say you say I want to spend for
How
me.
much it will cost? Where will you?
So that depends on the ether. So basically, if you say that my transaction will consume 5 gas units, and you say that each gas unit would relate to 2 ethers, that's a lot of it, like 0.00 something 2 ethers. And in that case, if 5 gas units are going, then you will be spending 10 ethers. So that's how it.
So when I create account, do they buy the pricing options also that this is what I'm ready to pay or?
So you need to have ethers in the first place. If you have an account and you want to do any transaction, you need to have some ethers in your balance. And say if you create a transaction and you
So
say
it
that
is,
you're
translated to some amount or something?
yes. So ethers is basically you can think of it as a unit for blockchain, but when an external person wants to join that, and for example, if I want to join the mainnet, I don't have ethers currently, and when I join the Ethereum, I create an account that won't give me ethers directly. I would need to have that. So for that, if Himanshu is already
Ether is in cryptocurrency or?
Yeah.
yes, so that is Ethereum's currency that it provides.
So we have to buy on the net.
Yeah.
Okay.
But does this concept apply to private blockchain as well?
The gas one.
Yeah,
So
gas and ether.
that depends. Like for Ethereum, it is required. If your blockchain requires it, then you have to have that. So some blockchains do it in a different way. Ethereum uses the concept of gas and gas price to hold this security and not allowing basically malicious users to.
So-
No, I'm just trying to understand, is this concept is only related to the trading of ether, or is it applicable to the private blockchain use cases as well?
It can be used there as well, but if it's a private network wherein you know your counterparties, then you do not need that. So this is basically when you can trust each of your members that they won't harm the network, then you can skip this part. But in case of a public network, this becomes a necessity to prevent it.
We use one private blockchain, which is basically like built on top of Ethereum. So it has the concept of gas and ether, but the gas value is 0. So like whenever you transact something in public Ethereum, you need to actually pay some ethers for every transaction. But because it's a private chain, and like you mentioned, it doesn't make sense in that case. So it won't charge you anything.
Yeah. So the concept of gas price is the same. You can choose to keep the gas price to 0. So that's why I was talking that why would you want to increase this gas price if you can choose it to keep it 0. So
Is like everything clear in gas, ether, and accounts, or do we have any questions?
Is gas something like like an escrow account kind of thing?
So it's not an account. It's just
Or it doesn't behave like an escrow?
It's like if I'm doing something and if somebody will mine my transaction, something like that, then I need to pay. Like why would someone else?
validate my transaction basically. If I'm doing something, I need to have why would someone else would want to write my transaction on the node? Why would they do it for me? So for that case, I need to pay something to the network, and that is why I paid via the gas.
And the more complex my transaction is, the more time will it take for the other person to mine or to validate. So yeah, so I have to obviously pay more. So it's just like if you write anything which is more complex, it will take more time for Navdeep to validate. So I have to pay her more.
We'll talk about mining in
Yeah.
detail, so that would make it more clear.
And I think sir mentioned the price of how much I need to pay. Who decides that? Like that keeps on changing. Like it can be the case that like Navdeep mentioned, if I want to print 5 things, then it might cost me 1 ether today, but tomorrow it might cost me 0.025 ethers. Like it doesn't. It's not a linear curve, and like everyone is aware that Bitcoin. Like there was a boom in the Bitcoin price last few years. That was because more and more people were interested in Bitcoin. So all these cryptocurrency networks, they're thriving on the number of people who are part of this network. The more people are, more like safer the network is, and something like that. So the ether and the cryptocurrency will change in that.
Excuse me, are we, okay, so my understanding that whatever the smart contract, whatever the gas has been decided, it it will be remain as it is. But when we talk about the conversion into dollars or INR, they will be altogether different. When we say that, for example, today, if I perform any operation that costs me say 10 ways, tomorrow it can't be like 20 or 30. No.
Exactly, like that won't change. It will still cost me 0.25 ways,
What
but
is
the
the
conversion
value of 10
Exactly.
ways in terms of dollars, INR, GBP, that will be altogether.
that yeah, the conversion will change.
Exactly.
Yeah, the gas and the particular crypto which will be sent, that would be like, constant.
Yeah. And just one more thing, I think the gas price, so any smart contract that we write, so we have to specify the minimum gas price. So it's not something we can say that I don't want to pay. If I do under as well, but network doesn't allow. So there is something, there are some,
Limits
good-
basically
yeah,
set
good-
by
good- if you want to identify what is actually the gas price, there are good tools to identify.
Genesis block, it's the first block which is part of the chain. Like whenever you start a blockchain, you have to start from somewhere. So that is the Genesis. And in Genesis block, we have few configurations which we can pass for the network. The most important one is the chain ID. So it's basically your network ID, and that would be constant for all the nodes which are part of that network. And secondly, there's a alloc block. If you can see, I'm not sure this is visible, but that contains this is basically this contains two entries. So the first one is the key here is the account address, and the value here is some balance. So it's like we're seeding these blocks, accounts with some account balance. So whenever you start a network and you want to introduce some currency, so that's how you do it. Like you say that these accounts, I'm seeding these accounts with these values, so that later on they can do some currency transfers. So that's how it works. So whenever you boot whenever you start your Geth client, you need to provide the Genesis file link in that. Yeah, we have been talking about mining. So what is actually mining? We need to, in order for our network to sustain, we need to add new blocks onto the chain. And the way to do that is one of the ways is mining. In mining, what we do is people are competing at the same moment to solve some cryptographic puzzle, and whoever has this puzzle solves the whoever has this solve the problem can mine the block, something like that. We'll talk about that in the next slide also. So like we briefly mentioned about the rewards. So suppose if I send a transaction and it costed me some amount of gas, which was more than what I paid to the person. Like if I'm sending something to Navdeep, I'll obviously it charge me that token which I'm transferring, plus it will charge me some fee. So that fee is like a mining reward for the miners, and any node can be. So whenever you start your Geth, at that time you can specify whether you're starting this node as a miner or not. But the condition is that miner has to have the blockchain previous database, so it has to be a full node. We talked about full node and half lightweight node earlier. So in order to add new blocks, miners are responsible for that. And you can stop mining at any point of time. Like there's a command for that in your Geth client, and you can start your mining at that time.
So who choose the node in the network as miner?
So suppose if I want to start mining, that's my responsibility. That I want to boot up a network and I want to be a miner. Like anyone can be a miner. It's because the public network. So it's my responsibility. Like whenever I start my blockchain node, at that time I can specify whether I want to mine. Yeah. We look at the code also. In that case, there's just a flag which we need to add, which will say that I'm a miner. Let's look at the word consensus. consensus is a way of achieving or way to reach to a decision. Because it's a decentralized network, there's no central authority who is saying that this is a valid transaction or this is a valid block. So we have to have a mechanism in which, by which actually we can add a node onto the network. So consensus is just a way to reach that decision. So there are two major sort of types of consensus. The first is proof of work. Proof of work is something which we just talked about, the mining problem. So in proof of work, we are saying that first of all, in both proof of work and proof of stake, it's the network's responsibility to add new nodes. So in proof of work, we'll say that if a node is doing some mathematical computation and adding a block to the chain, then it's a valid block and everyone will agree. Talk more about like how we broadcast this block later on. But the idea is that people will have to compete with each other, and whoever wins this competition will be like given money for that, and that block would be added. That's the basic gist. But there are a few basic fundamental problems in this. The first one is that although the entire system is decentralized, but imagine that if I am running a mining node and the probability of me able to win the puzzle, it's directly dependent on how much better hardware am I using. Like if I'm using a bigger machine, then the chances are more. Similarly, if I'm not able to solve it every time, I'll obviously pool with Navdeep or Manali. So we three will do the mining on our machines, and we'll say that if any one of us will win, we'll just split. So this is called a mining pool. So people have ended up like making their mining farms, and they're totally doing this 24/7, and so it's sort of like a centralization now. Like people are coming together in mining. So what they're ending up doing is like to take a decentralized network and they sort of centralize it. So the biggest issue is like we talk about 51% and more than 50% thing. So imagine that if there's a pool which is this big, which acquires more than 50% of all the miner blocks which are on the network, then they can obviously say that this fraud transaction is a valid transaction, and everyone will have to agree because the entire algorithm is written in such a way. And this is not a hypothetical situation. There are the biggest mining pools. If all of these pools combine, then they'll acquire around 52% of the entire mining strength. So that is possible. So that's not something which is hypothetical. Second is the energy usage. Like it takes a lot of electricity for a block to be mined. Like that's a lot. That's not at all scalable solution. So to avoid both of these issues, there was the proof of stake came. It's a fairly newer algorithm. Proof of work has been for a quite long time, but proof of stake is fairly new. It's not yet implemented in the Ethereum mainnet, but it's already done on some Ethereum test network. So what it does is that it's basically that if me and Manali want to take part in mining, or they call it minting in this case, then both of us will put some stake onto the network. Like I'll give my 50 cryptocurrency or Ether, and Manali will give her 30 cryptocurrency. They'll put that on stake, and the more stake I put in, the more chances are that I'll be given a chance to verify or to mint the next block, something like that. And because whoever has more stake, if I'm putting some money onto it, and the first precondition is that if I mine a wrong block, which was later on verified as invalid, then I'll have to, like whatever stake I put, that I will lose that. That's the first condition. So we ended up creating a network in which people will put their stake on, and we are just avoiding all the mathematical computation in that case. But still, like it's not yet 100% tested. And one of the bigger advantages of proof of stake is that it's like almost impossible, near impossible to have the 50% attack, because in order to say that if I take the 50% votes, then I have to I have to put in half of the cryptocurrency which is available in the entire network. which will cost me billions because like the cryptocurrency value is more. So that's why it's more safe. But yeah, people are still looking into it. But we have to have like a better consensus algorithm than proof of work if we want to scale.
What about that mining pool that you have, the three biggest mining pools?
Yeah.
What if they choose to do proof of stake and they say, okay,
So you cannot say that they'll do proof of stake and I'll do proof of work because the entire algorithm which we are using, it has to be consistent. Like if let's say if from the tomorrow Ethereum people decided that they'll use proof of work or proof of stake, then it will have to be like a backward compatible for all.
okay.
So everyone will use.
So let's say there's a different currency on network, not Ethereum.
Okay.
So in a similar fashion, actually, in proof of work, they control or they have significant impact on more than 50% of the nodes. Similarly, though, if they go with the proof of stakes aspect, then they can, yes, it will be still billions of dollars, but what if they were able to do it and collect all those rewards or amount currency, whatever it is, and make it more than 50%? And then all the processing will be done from their end only.
Yeah.
So they will basically, it's like, okay, if I have 100 rupees and I inject my 50%, 51% on that, and I know it's going to increase, so I will do it.
Yeah, like it is possible. I'm not saying that 50% attack is not possible in proof of stake, but given the size of our Ethereum network, which is there at the moment, and the amount of cryptocurrency which is flowed, owning 51% of cryptocurrency to one individual or to entity is like physically
It's
impossible.
not like a single entity, and it's a single mining pool. It's a pretty big pool.
Yeah, but like the stake which we put, that is from a single miner node. It's not from a pool. Like when I say
Oh, the
pool
stake
thing,
has to be from a single.
yeah, the pool it's not a physical pool. It's like a logical pool that we just need to an agreement that if me, Manali, or Navdeep got any Bitcoin, then we'll just all ether, then we'll split.
The rules stake has to be from a single.
Yeah, that's what my understanding.
So does the network know about this mining pool, or it's just
No, it's not a concept for Ethereum to know of. It's more of like a logical thing. Like if I say that all of us will start mining at this point, and like if any one of us gets a ether, then we'll just split because it will increase the chances of any one of us getting money.
So now that we have talked about all these terms related to writing, what happens when you want to write a block, so let's just see it in a way that it makes more sense. So let's say there are two nodes. There are currently, you can see 3 nodes here. 2 of them, for the sake of convenience, have not shown the internal parts of these nodes. The purpose that these nodes right now, they are just sending a transaction onto the network, and this is a minor node. So I have 2 nodes who are sending 2 transactions to me, transaction 1 and transaction 2. So these nodes, basically whenever you want to send a transaction, you broadcast it to the entire network. So now there's a node which chooses to be a minor node. Now each node has a transaction pool. Now this transaction pool is basically a set of all the transactions which are not in the confirmed state, which are not yet written on the blockchain. So these are the transactions in pending state, and these are there at each node, be it a minor node or any other node in the network. So basically at the minor nodes layer, the miner is responsible for writing a block on the network. So in the transaction pool, it chooses the transaction that it needs to write on the next block basically. So when we talked about gas price, so why would a miner want to choose your transaction? So miner is concerned with what rewards it needs to get. So in that case, if your transaction is paying more gas price to the miner, or it is more rewarding for the miner, so miner will choose your node. So hence will choose your transaction. So basically, if your transaction has more gas price associated with it, it has more chances to be written on a block quickly. Otherwise, it would remain in the transaction pool for a very long time before some miner want to pick it up. So at the miner's end, it picks up the transactions to write into the block. It creates a block with sub-transactions. It does the proof of work that it has to do. Say the miner is able to compute that mathematical puzzle to be able to find a hash block which has done the proof of work. Now the miner would broadcast this block to the entire network. And at any point the miner is able to write the block. It needs to make sure that it is in the current state wherein it has the link to the previous block. So for say wherever a miner is able to complete this proof of work, meanwhile some other block got written on the network, then this block would be discarded because some other block has already been written. So it has to do everything all over again. So this is basically a race sort of among the miners who gets to write the block first in the network.
Sorry. The base depends on, you said, on the hardware specs that
Yes.
you use and the software, how optimized the software is to run those operations, right?
So basically, you can think of it as a problem wherein you're given a solution that you have to create a hash with say 7 zeros in the front. In that case, it's basically a hit and try method for your machine to calculate that solution, right? So so it's mostly probability based, as in when your machine would be able to hit that. So as quickly your machine is able to do that hit and try thing, it would be able to come up with the solution first, quickly.
And the better the hardware specs are, more CPU, more RAM is
Yeah.
available, and the better the algorithm is to get that. So that is where the engineering
Computing part.
part of this comes in.
But what happens if there is no miner available? As a company, I have started doing transaction, and there is no miner available to code it or to hash it.
Yeah. So
Right.
then your transaction will always be there in the transaction. So you need miners to write on the blockchain.
Like that's
Unless there's a miner in your block, in your basically network, there's no one who would write the.
But then my transaction would not proceed, right?
Yes, it won't be written on the blockchain.
But then-
It will be always be in this transaction pool of pending state.
So if there is no miner, you can also choose to be a miner.
Yeah. You can choose to be a miner, and then it will take some more time because you don't have that computational power. But then if there's no other competition, then some way whenever you finish, you'll be able to. But then since rewards are associated with it, so there are always miners who want to earn ethers. So we defined how ethers were initially given to the network. Apart from the transfer of those initial ethers, if you want more ethers in the network, so you would do mining to generate more ethers.
But is it possible to have any network without miners? Public one.
No, but there would always be miners who would want to earn.
Yeah, I mean, it's.
Then it would be a very it would be a network which would not be used by anyone basically. If you create a network, no one is doing mining on that network, no one would want to be a part of that network. So it would be a failed network, failure.
But isn't it possible to have a network where, let's say, as of now, as of current moment, there is no pending transaction, and let's say all the miners just stop somehow, they shut down or whatever it is. Then there is a new transaction happening, and for that transaction there is really no miner there.
Yeah.
So that transaction will still stay in a pending state till that completion is there. Because till until someone restarts their miner node or some new miner node is there, it will not be there. As long as it will not be used, if there is no miner, there will be no further processing of a transaction.
Yes.
Yeah.
So basically no new blocks would be
No
written
new
in the
blocks will
network
be there, but the
unless
existing blocks will still.
yeah, they would
be there.
still be there on the network, just that new blocks would not be written with the transactions that are happening.
returns, how can we make it more scalable?
For example, miner 1 has picked up or created a hashed block with transaction 1 and 2, and miner 2 has created a block per se of the previous block. Then it wouldn't be the longest block, and hence this would be a source of truth. And transaction 3 would again go back to its pending state, and some other miner needs to pick it up again.
mentioned, somebody mentioned about the private blockchain. So let's look at one of the implementation of that. Okay, so Quorum is a flavor of Ethereum. It's basically a permission and a private blockchain network. So it's owned by it is owned by JP Morgan Chase, and it is written on top of Ethereum. So they have tweaked the Ethereum client for it, and they have a layer on top of it. They call it Privacy Manager, and there are two flavors of Privacy Manager at the moment, and they both are pluggable. First is Constellation, which I mentioned here, and the other is Tessera. They both are doing the same thing. It's just that they are written in different languages, and the performance is different. So Quorum is a private network, and it's a permission network. So whoever wants, like, it's not like in Ethereum that anybody can join the network. Whoever has the permission, then like those can only be part of the network. So there are multiple ways in which we can give permission for a person to join the network. There are some leader follower pattern in which where the leader will elect whether this person is allowed or not, and there are like a normal voting mechanism in which if more than 50% of people will say that we want this node to be part of the network, then only that node will be made part of the network. Secondly, you can it's a private blockchain. I think we mentioned in the very beginning that the public because in public blockchain everything is broadcasted to everyone. It is not directly like we cannot directly use this in a few of the banking domains or few of the domains in which privacy is also concerned. So in those cases, Quorum comes very handy. So Quorum has a feature in which you can say that you want this transaction to be visible to only these parties, something like that. So every transaction in Quorum has two parts. First is a public part and second is a private part. So when we say that it is known to only these people, we say that the private part is only visible to these. The public hash of the transaction is still visible to everyone, so that anyone can still verify whether this transaction was valid or was it changed at later point of time. That was a basic use case of blockchain, is that it's verifiable. So that's possible in this way. Yeah.
What about confidentiality?
As in
like if a person makes a transaction, like there are other cryptocurrencies where whosoever has made the transaction, his identity won't be revealed, and you cannot even find that out.
In Ethereum, I think it's not the case. Like in Ethereum, every time. So yeah.
Yeah, that's fine. So how it's beneficial to financial department then when we have such currencies available?
Yeah. So it's not just a currency thing. Like it's what Ethereum provides, but for a private permission part. So that's not possible here. Like if I'm making a transaction with Navdeep, obviously that transaction would be signed by my account. So anyone can know that I have made a transaction, but like nobody can know that I have made a transaction with just Navdeep or just Manali. They just know that Himanshu sent this transaction to someone. So like that's how it is working. If I'm sending some money to anyone privately, then this part would be broadcasted that Himanshu has made this transaction, and the hash will be propagated, but it's not the recipient of that won't be present inside the block.
But I guess that's the basic principle of crypto transaction, that if you are making a transaction, if you are making any trade, you can't deny that, like anti-replay.
Yeah, so you can't deny, like if I committed a transaction, and then you can't, like anybody can verify whether this transaction was made by me or not. That's still there. Like the basic thing, that's not true.
Alright, thanks.
The last point which I mentioned is high performance. The high performance is just because we are not using mining here, because it's a private network. So the direct proof of work algorithm cannot be used here. Because transactions can be sent to a private network also, to a subset of a network. That's why you can't use the same proof of work algorithm. So we have different other algorithms which are way faster than proof of work. So the throughput of transactions in Quorum is considerably higher as compared to Ethereum. This is a sample Quorum network. How does it look? There are 2 points worth seeing. Here is every Quorum has 2 parts, Quorum node. First is a get and second is a constellation, which we just saw.
block or transaction?
So if I do a transaction, at that time only like EVM takes care of it. It's like the entire logic is still the same as Ethereum. That is not changed. Like this, in Ethereum, if I commit a transaction, if I send a token, then EVM takes care of it. Like the block which I'll send or the transaction which I'll send will have that. The detail in the block will have the hash of all like previous block. That still be there. It's just that the conditional visibility of the data that is maintained by the privacy manager.
But here my question is towards
Block, then only that would be added. But I have a fundamental question, which like for all of you, like if you are saying that you have a private network, in which you are saying that you will be like you will not be, everything won't be visible to everyone, then you cannot say that anyone can be a miner and say whether this is a valid transaction or not. You have to have like a central authority in any ways. So like different private blockchain have different ways to handle this. Like some like Coda is another competitor of Quorum, which has a concept of a notary. So the idea is that every transaction has to take care of notary. Like notary should know everything about every transaction. So you have to have a central authority in that case. Like so, that's like a trade-off which you have to make. That's what I think.
probably connect you off.
Yeah, we can talk about it.
In some way, you're moving back to decentralization.
It's not. Okay, maybe we can talk about it after we are done with the demo. Yeah, but it's like something which is pretty interesting.
But then still, if you are doing something, it still has to go through all the stakeholders of the system. It's not exactly central. As in, if one person is responsible for writing the block, the other stakeholders still verify that block and reject it.
Plus you keep on switching the one person.
It cannot be private for all, it needs to be private for some stakeholders. So those stakeholders will still be verifying or validating that transaction for you. Like you cannot have a private transaction again and again, that wouldn't mean anything. You would have a private transaction with some stakeholders at hand, and you can choose not to show that transaction to the rest of the network, but some still would be there. And in that case, the transparency and the validation would be at those stakeholders there. So you can choose which stakeholders you want in your transaction.
Along with that, notary has to be notified.
Yeah, that is like one of the use cases of ways to handle this. Plus you can have, like, there's no one fixed person who is responsible for this. You generally keep on electing new miners, or you just keep on shifting them. So it's never that it's only my responsibility to do this. It is like, still it's a network's responsibility.
But I think whenever in private you choose, so there are, you've talked about Coda. Coda has nodes which are doing
Yeah,
the
let's
notary
not,
part.
yeah, let's only reason I introduced Coda was just to like, to say there are other mechanisms to handle this.
So now that we have talked about blockchain, we have talked about Ethereum, we have talked about Quorum. You see where the links go. So Quorum is again a private implementation of it, right? So we'll be showing you a demo over here. We'll be building a voting tab, and yeah, we'll talk about it in detail. So yeah, a centralized voting app. What are the major flaws that you see here? So in a normal application, you see there is a browser, there is a server wherein you have your front end and back end residing, and you have a database that is connected to your back end. What are the major flaws that you see here? Without looking here.
It's pretty much the same which we talked about.
Yeah, so pretty much same. That the data could be changed. You can directly log into the database, run an update query. It's a central database. No one would know that you have changed anything, right? The source code on the web server could also be changed at any time, of course. So again, there is no transparency as to who has changed the data, what are the changes that are being made, and there is no audit of things that you have been doing, right? So we'll be solving problems around this application. We'll be designing our application in a way wherein these two problems, wherein our data could be changed, which is basically around what we call immutability. So we want our data to be immutable, and yeah, we want it to be transparent, right? So we'll be solving these two problems. So we'll be building a decentralized voting app wherein instead of a centralized database, all the transaction data is shared across the nodes. So we'll have a browser, we'll have a front-end application, and at the back-end we'll have nodes, distributed nodes, and these nodes would be sharing their data across the blockchain. Any normal voting tab, what would be the major requirements for a voting application? You know, there would be a single voter who can just vote for a single party, and he can vote only from one booth, right? So here we have shown multiple voters. We have Julie and Manali, which can vote from booth 1. We have Himanshu and Navdeep who can vote from booth 2. We have an election commission who will have access to the whole data as to who is voting for whom from which booth, and he'll be responsible for calculating the actual winner whenever the elections are over. And of course we have a Java API that will be talking to your Quorum blockchain. Here we've been using Web3j for connecting Java to our blockchain application. We'll be showing it in detail when we show you the application. So these would be the 3 requirements that we'll be fulfilling from the application. Voter can only cast a single vote, and only election commission can view the total votes. And yeah.
Just one point, because we are not using Ethereum. If we were using Ethereum, then any vote, suppose that if Manali casted a vote, then it would be visible for all the nodes. And here we are using Quorum, so if we have written application in such a way that if anyone of the voter votes, then that vote would be visible only to that person and the election commission. So election commission will eventually know everything about who voted for whom, but nobody, no other voter will know anything about it. So let's take up, are you guys set up with the application?
Yeah.
Okay. Maybe we
I
can
hope everyone
open that
has
slide again.
known the repo and
This is on that voting app. I'm not sure if this is the right platform to discuss it, but is it even required for the election commissioner to know who exactly voted to whom? It's more like he would want to know how many votes were in favor of a particular party.
In our application, we just get that. Yeah, if you see the code, we just implemented the counter. We are not.
yes, the
we are not
election commission
saying.
doesn't know who has voted for whom. It's just the total count that he's giving.
Yeah, even if you don't have the setup ready, that is also fine. We can just follow along. In the meantime, maybe you guys can set up if not. Do we have a if you guys are ready, let's open localhost 8081. So this is a very fancy UI which you're gonna get. So let's quickly walk through the application. So you can log in as 3 players: booth 1, booth 2, or election commission. This by no way production ready application. This is just we put together for the sake of displaying how you handle all the logics in your smart contract, and how does your front end how can your front end talk to your blockchain.
So do I run this as a Docker?
So are you running the Docker with you? Have you done the Docker Composer?
Yeah.
Okay.
Docker build, do I run Docker build?
So just do Docker PS. Can you check whether everything is fine with that?
It's not running.
Okay. Just do Docker Compose up -d. Guys who are done, can you see this? Right? Yes or no would help.
Yeah.
Okay. So if you log in as a booth, then you can basically cast a vote. So you can say that you are, let's say, this voter, and you can cast for any one of these candidates. If you cast a vote, then I'll tell you what this is, but this is basically what we are doing is we are writing onto the blockchain, and this is a raw dump of the transaction which we get as a result. Okay, so couple of things to know here is that it has a gas used column because quorum doesn't use gas or something like that, so it will always be 0 in this case. The block number will be your block number of this transaction. In your case, if you guys are running, you can see it should be 1, I think, or 2.
Block number?
Yeah, the second last column.
3.
Yeah. So and every time you vote, it will keep on changing. So it will create a new transaction for every time you vote. Okay.
Vote for the same voter to the same candidate.
Yeah. So the few of the things are broken over here. Like you can re-vote again. Like you can vote again for party 1 and again for party 1 and again for party 1. And similarly, and if you log in as a same functionalities with vote 2, like you have these 2 accounts seeded. Like you can log in as Navdeep and say I want to vote for party 2. Okay. And again you can again vote and again vote. Every time you get a new transaction hash in return.
That's a hex, right?
Yeah, that's the hexadecimal representation of your. So if I log in as an election commission and if I do a check result, I'm seeing both are winner. So this is something which is also broken. So we'll go step by step and we'll fix it. First of all, let's fix this thing that a voter can only vote 1, so it cannot vote again. Okay.
Can we also show them the project architecture?
Yeah,
first?
that's what I'm going to do now. So this, if you can open your Ethereum hands-on or not, if you don't have your machine, then you can probably look at this if this is visible. Is this visible? Like, is it zoomed enough? Okay. Just ignore these quorum data for now. So we have 3 main, or better, if you open the Docker Compose. So this is how our Compose is looking at the moment. So essentially we have a web API, web service, we have an API service, and we have 3 instances of quorums running. So each of these quorum represent one of the participant node. So one is dedicated for booth 1, another is dedicated for booth 2, and the last one is dedicated for election commission. That's how we have devised in this case. Okay, let's open, like web we don't have to touch the web, so let's just ignore web for now. Let's open a quorum, any one of these. Okay, so these are the environment variables which we are passing to quorum. So let's see few of those. We talked about constellation key, and we said that at that time, maybe I can show you the slide. So when we were talking about the quorum cluster over here, we said that every quorum node has a constellation and a constellation key. Yeah, I don't know why. So we have to have a key for every node. So this is the private part and the public part of the constellation key. And so we have seeded these 2 accounts for node, and the seeding of account is also part of our quorum image. So because every node has 2 parties hard coded, in one case it's someone and other case it's someone else's. So we have hard coded those 2 over here. And the permission nodes, this is something which you'll only see in quorum, because quorum is a permission network. So you need to say that this node has permission to connect to these nodes, something like that. If you have a provision to restrict one node to take part in like the cluster, you can say that this node will only be connected to these nodes, something like that. So you need to pass in all the IDs of all the nodes with which this node can connect. In our case, any node can connect to any other node, so it will have keys of every of the entire network. And the last one which I will talk about is the constellation nodes. Like here, if you see, we have 2 parallel network running. The yellow one is the constellation network, and the blue one is the Ethereum network. So the yellow one, in order for the yellow network to connect, you need to pass in the IP address of all the constellation nodes. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm passing the IP addresses of all the constellation nodes. Essentially, you can use only one IP address also, but just for the sake of explanation, I have used every. But you can just pass in constellation node of address of one of the constellation node, and it will also connect. Okay. Now let's look at how we are running our quorum. We talked about get a little. So let's see how. So we have a inside this Docker we have a start get script, which is basically running our get client over here. So that's the one which is responsible for spinning up your Ethereum network. And we have downloaded the get, like inside the Docker. If you see, you will see that we have downloaded the get. Use the make file to create a new version of it, and then we are using get, and we are passing all these configurations, and we're starting our gets with these configurations over here. We briefly mentioned the Genesis JSON file, so there must be a Genesis over here. So this is the Genesis file which we are using. This is our dummy Genesis, and we are not seeding any blocks with any ethers because Quorum doesn't, in Quorum, ethers doesn't add any value because the gas price is always 0 for all the transactions. Okay, so this is, and whenever we start our Quorum node, we need to boot up both, like we need to boot the Ethereum network as well as the privacy manager also. So whenever we start both, like the Constellation and Get. Now let's quickly look at the API in the Docker Compose. So in the API, I'm saying that my API is dependent on this Quorum. So this is a feature of Docker Compose, which is basically saying that start API only if your Quorum is running. And yeah, that is it. Like that is it. Like then API will start and connect with our Quorum nodes. Okay, let's try and fix the first use case which we have. The first use case which is breaking is that there's no validation. I can basically again run the same, again vote from the same party. So let's open let me open my client API alone, like on IntelliJ. Yeah. So if you look at the source main and inside the resources, you will have a election.sol. So we use a language called Solidity, which is more or less like JavaScript, and in that we write smart contracts. So this is our voting or election smart contract which we have. I'll quickly walk you through it. We have 3 variables or class variables. The first one is the address of the election commission. So this will be like the account address of the election commission. We are using it for permissioning. Second is basically an array which is saying whether this account has voted previously or not. And the third one is basically a list saying that this party has these many votes. This is used to check how many votes are there for a party. This is a constructor. So whenever we vote, we basically call this vote method. And how do we add a validation in the smart contract? We use something called a require statement. Like if you look at the get votes for method, we have added a require condition over here. So what it means is that if this condition fails, then break altogether. Okay, so we'll have to just use this again over here, require, and we already have a array to take care of whether this has voted or not. So we'll just use that. You guys can follow me if you face an issue, then maybe you can raise that. And has been, we just say.
This one you need to follow, and next one you need to solve yourself.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Okay. Is this visible now?
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll use something called a message sender, which is basically the account address of the person who is calling this. So I'm basically using the same code which I've written in the get vote format for your reference. So I'm saying that it should not have voted, this user should not have voted, then only allow this to continue. Okay. This should take care of our validation. If you want, like we can run it and then we can verify it again. For this, all you need to do is just do docker compose up -d. Okay. Just add a build in the end. API. So if you see, it is recreating the API. So Docker Compose is smart enough to see which part of your entire cluster has changed. So let's just wait quickly for our API to be up, then maybe we can verify that. Okay. Let's wait for a few minutes for our API to be up. In the meantime, maybe we can jump to the Java code and see how we are, like, what are our endpoints. So you guys are done, right? So let's take a look. Is this visible?
No, I don't see any voters. On the top of Stack portal is blank.
Okay, maybe your API is not updated. If you look at the console of your web, you must be throwing some error. So it takes some time for the API to work. Just wait for some time. Maybe you can do Docker PS. Let's see whether it's working. Now you can go to your web interface. It takes some time for API to be up.
Yeah, maybe it should have been.
Yeah. Just go to, like, mine is working now. Okay.
Yeah.
Kashish, is working over there?
Just trying it out.
Okay.
Is it working over here?
Okay. So now let's try and vote. So Jogi can vote first one for party one.
Yeah, got that.
Now it's throwing an error. I'm not restricting anything, I'm just putting the entire object just for showing. So what it means is that this is the exact error which we get from our blockchain in return. So in Ethereum there's a thing by which you can add a message in your required statements. So inside this Solidity file I could have written something like this, that already voted, and we'll get this message in our API, but the Quorum has not yet incorporated this in the code, so it's not possible with Quorum. So
In case you want, you can put these validations at your API end.
yeah. So this is done. Now let's go and let's try and log in as an election commission. Let's see how the things are looking over here. Still, it's saying both are given, so there must be something which we are missing. Let's take a look at the API. We have not talked much about how API is. Let's take a minute over there. So if you go to the controller, you will see 3 controllers. The one which we are particularly interested in is the election commission controller. In the vote controller, there is only one endpoint, which is just for voting. So this is calling that vote method in our smart contract which we just showed you. So this is basically saying that booth ID this with the user ID this will cast a vote for this. So let's take a moment and see the election commission controller. So one endpoint is voters endpoint, which will give you a list of all the voters. So I'll show you how it is looking like if I go to a booth. You guys can just see my screen. So this is what we are getting for now. So this is we are getting an address of the accounts from here. So maybe you guys can just see my screen for some time. Is this visible? I feel like it's not visible. Okay.
Yes, the dark mode is not visible.
Yeah.
Can I disable the dark mode?
Okay.
Maybe just copy paste it on a
Yeah,
provider.
sure. So I'm getting an JSON array in return, which is giving me 2 main values. First is the name of the candidate of the participant, and second is the address. So these address are we mentioned briefly about your externally owned account. So this is like identity of Juhi on this ledger, and this is the identity of Manali on this ledger. So every time Manali will cast a vote, the transaction will say that this is done from this account, something like that. Okay.
So the message will not contain not the name.
No, like that's up to you. Like if you write a smart contract in such a way that you can do that, but in our case we have not done it. We have just incremented like the number. So if you look at the contract in the vote method, we are just saying that votes of selection is equal to votes of selection plus 1. We're just incrementing it via doing nothing fancy in this case.
So it's your identity basically. So identity needs to be unique. We cannot keep it as a unique.
So also privacy.
Yeah.
Okay, so that's how. So when we do this, actually I wanted to show you, like go inside the get and show you, but I don't think that would be visible. Like my terminal would be visible. I'm not sure. Increase the font size. That's good enough. That's good enough. Okay, so what I'm doing is I'll try and go inside one of my forum nodes, and I'll show you how many accounts I have, something like that. So you guys, if you can follow, then it's good. Otherwise, like it has got nothing to do with the exercise which we are solving. So I'm going inside the Docker which is running the quorum. Okay. Then I'll do get. So inside the quorum Docker we have a get running. That's why we are able to make this transaction from all. So I just want to quickly demonstrate one thing. Like if I attach to my get account, so just bear with me for 1 minute. Yeah, so what I'm saying is like attach to the Ethereum client which is running on this IP address. So every time you run your quorum node, you have a provision to allow, like to enable an RPC port. So in this case, we have enabled 22,000 port. So hence we can do this. What's time do we have? What's the time? Okay. So if I do this, and if I do ETH dot accounts, I'm not sure whether you guys are following or not, but if you're not, then always fine. It has got nothing to do with the application. So it will show me 2 accounts. So that's because we have, like in our quorum image, we have written explicitly that create 2 accounts, something like that. Okay. And what I can do is I can do the h.block number, and it will tell me how many blocks do I have on my Ethereum machine at the moment. So it's probably different for everyone. Like in my case, it's 25. Okay. And there's one more thing. The last thing which I'll show you is get transaction.
So it will depend on the number of ports.
Yeah, number of transactions which you have made. Like in my case, I would have done it, I think, more. So there's a method called get transaction from block, and if I show, like if I put the last block number, so like it will give me like the a detail of my block which I have. Okay. So let's go over there. Okay. So now let's try and fix the election commission controller. Election commission controller is still really it's not working fine. So the first step would be to directly go inside the election commission controller. Okay. So if you see this method, we are calling this method whenever we click on the get votes button. So are you guys, have you opened this? Okay, so on line 51 and 52, I have like purposely written 0. So what I want to show is how your client will call your blockchain. So we are using Web3j. So what Web3j provides is it has it creates a wrapper over your smart contracts. So if you see this election class, this is nothing but a wrapper over our election controller which we create. Election smart contract which we created. Okay, so it's a Java file. So Web3j is responsible for converting the Solidity file into this Java file. I have not created this. Like this is something which is auto-generated. Like it's shown in the like in JavaScript, you don't actually need this because that's not a strongly typed language. But in Java, you need that. So hence it is working now. If I go back, so let's try and call the get vote. So inside the Solidity, we have something called a get votes for method, which takes the ID of the candidate and return us the number of votes which are there. So let's just try and call this method election contract dot. See, this method is already shown. So this is something which Web3j is doing out of the box. And if you look at the contract, it expects a uint8, which is the candidate ID. Candidate ID is integer for now, like that's just a number, and we have hard coded only two IDs, 1 and 2. So what I can do is like big integer dot value of 1. So like uint is converted into big integer in Web3j, and there's till now I have not done it enough. Like I need to call this method. So there are two type of method calls. First is send and second is a call. So send is in which you are not making any transaction onto the blockchain. You are just fetching something out. So whenever you write something onto the ledger, at that time you create a transaction, right? Like if you're writing something, if you're reading something, then that's not a transaction. So if you want to just call a method to get something, then it's a okay. Do the same thing for the second. Just say it to. Then we are sorted. Let's try and run this now. Same Docker Compose up minus the build. Now let's see how it looks. It'll take some time to be up. You guys following? There's one thing which I skipped. It's like consider smart contract as like sort of like a class. So every time you want to use an instance of a class, you need to say that new class, something like that. So same thing is in smart contracts. Like if you want to use a smart contract, you need to deploy a new copy of that smart contract, right? So that's what we call a contract deployment part. So I've written application in such a way that whenever you start your application, you deploy a new contract at that point. But if you look at here, I'm saying that you can check the election. To refresh the contract, click here. So whenever you click here, I deploy a new copy of the smart contract altogether. So it's just wiping out everything onto the. So it's saying that I'm using a new copy of the election commission contract. Okay. But the good part about blockchain is like anything you write onto the blockchain is there forever. So you can go back at any point of time, use that older version of election commission controller, something like that. Because it's immutable, at any point of time you can go back and see what was the state over there. So I think it would be up by now. Let's see. Yeah. So if I is voting for party one, done. If I vote again, it will break. Now if I go back here and see, it's still showing both are winner. Any guesses why it's not working till now?
Of the deployment is
No, deployment would work if we run the API like I created in such a way. We are getting it from the controller, but any guesses why it's not working? Because you are returning 0. What?
Because you are returning 0.
From where? Yeah, from the contract I'm still returning 0. Yeah. So what I did is like from here I'm saying that contract.get vote for, call this method. But if I go inside this method get vote for, I'm still returning 0. So that's why it's returning 0 every time. That's why it's showing that it's same. So all I have to do is just return it from this map, this votes map, because I'm setting it in the votes map only. So I'll just say votes of candidate. So you'll say that for this candidate ID, get me the how many votes there are. Okay. But again, I have to build my API because I need a version of the Java file. let's again do that.
And in this case, we're deploying API again because we have bound the contract deployment along with API. Otherwise, we wouldn't have to deploy the API, just start using the new version of the contract.
Yeah. Okay. So we deployed a new version of the API again. Let's see whether it's up yet or not. For that, I can go to my UI. Yeah, it's down. Now let's see whether it's working fine. Do you go for party one? Go back here. Let's see this. So it's like the getting and setting is working fine. So what have we achieved in this? This might not seem a lot in this case, but what we have done is like we have decentralized the person who is responsible for selecting who is the winner of your election. And although this might not be the best way to implement the to modern scenario, but if we see that we have like decentralized the person or the entity which is responsible for your elections or voting, and this is just one use case. You can use the same thing for other use cases also. Yeah. Do we have any questions or any doubts in this? In the entire application or something like that? Yeah. No?
A lot.
Okay.
Nothing.
Can we also do how we are passing the configuration to API? We are passing the information to API.
Okay.
Because API Docker Compose, Docker started on
Yeah, so if you, one thing is, like if you, let me quickly show you that. Take this out. So this is so inside my properties file, I'm saying that pods config is this. So if you open, like if you look at the config, what I'm saying is that I'm basically passing all the players which are available and the ports which are there. Let's ignore the accounts part for now. So what I want you guys to focus on is this, like the Constellation pub and the IP address. So whenever I connect to one of the pod, I'm saying, like, this is not a real world example, but if I log in as a booth 1, then I'll have to make a connection with my booth 1 pod, and the IP address of that is given over here. And this is something same which we have provided in the Docker Compose. So in real world application, production application, you won't see like this thing over there. You'll obviously directly go inside and log in as a booth 1 app. In that case, this would be like you'll know what your IP address is, and you won't know the addresses of other pods. Yeah, the second thing which is worth sharing is the Constellation public key. So this is like we have been talking, because we are using Quorum, and Quorum manages the privacy using privacy manager, and we talked about it, and the Constellation is the privacy manager for this. So I'll quickly show you the code in this case. So there's a class called transaction manager. This is an entire entity of Quorum. Ethereum has got nothing to do with this. So there's a field for like here we can specify that this transaction would be private for which of the nodes, something like that. So Quorum has an additional feature which is called a private for. So if in Ethereum, if I want to send a token to let's say Navdeep, all I have to do is I have to say that a send transaction from my account to Navdeep's account, and this is the value. In Quorum, what else we can do? We can specify like this transaction should be private for only these fields. So there's an array called private for, in which you just pass these constellation keys which I just shown, and that would be like Quorum will take care of this, that this transaction should only be visible to these people. Yeah, so that's how privacy is maintained in Quorum. There can be other ways also. Like you could establish a channel of some sort that this channel is only private for these, but how Quorum maintains is that at every transaction, whenever you talk to a smart contract, whenever you deploy your smart contract, at that time you can say that this transaction would be private for these variables. Okay. I think we are almost out of time. So, but one thing is still left inside this application. I'll leave this for you guys to do if you have time and if you want to do that. Is that there's one more validation which is still left, is that the people who are from account like booth, they can only vote for that particular booth. And that validation is still not there. Like although on the UI front I have stopped them, like there's no Himanshu and Navdeep in booth one, but from the back end it's still there. So
we copy that from that page.
Yeah, that's maybe we want. So I think we are almost out of time. We've covered most of these things. Yeah, we've covered in bit of actually also.
So, Himanshu and you folks, right? Still we have 5 minutes left. If you want to wrap it up quickly and just recap everything which you discussed, you can do that. Otherwise, you can feel free to ask the question.
Yeah, I just want that. So, like we have an application which has some bugs and we fixed those, right? And every time we fix, we obviously not.
So there's a catch in this. When we say that we fix the bug in the contract, the bug will always be there inside the older version of the contract. Yeah, so what it means that once I deploy something onto the blockchain, which is a buggy software, there's no way you can change that at all. Like that code will always be there.
But not for anything for the new transactions, only for. But is it possible for like disable or like do something which that
you can like so. In this case, if let's suppose we created a new for the older elections solidity file which we created, there's no easier way to change that, like because like by the very nature of blockchain, anything you write is immutable. Like obviously I cannot go back and say that change that code, but like that will be there. There's no workaround for that. What else you can do? That's just like a hacks for that. But generally, what we do in this case is like we write our modular smart contracts in such a way that we keep this thing in mind that there will be bugs in future. So what if we have to change this thing? Then how can we make it like that in production if something breaks or there's a bug or you want to change something out, then you don't have a dependency on the. So it's a good read if you read about the MVC pattern of contracts. They basically split the contracts into multiple parts.
So the contracts in itself, they are
like instead of deploying one election contract, you basically deploy 2 or 3 contracts for one functionality. You'll just read about it, but the idea is just to change, like just to inject the data part into the logic part, because the main concern is that the logic part will have bugs and they will change, but the data part has to be same. Like the dictionary that Himanshu has voted for this candidate will not have to be changed. So just a quick read.
So that data has to stay as it was. Like in this scenario, all the data was being cleared every time we do a document, but we can't really do this in a live manner.
You can still do the Docker build case, that is fine, but like you cannot go back and change the state of your ledger.
So it's like, if it done in one, if it doesn't work, you move it to the B, right?
Yeah, so there can be multiple ways. Like one way can be to decommission the older version of the elections altogether, just use the new one. Other one can be just use different APIs altogether. Like for the older version you use this API, for the newer version you use this API. Because API is something which you can change. Like if you are making that something like that. But generally, like if
comes in the CI/CD pipeline kind of a thing, which Docker comes and fits in along with the Jenkins or some Maven or the like Kubernetes, right? Kind of thing.
this is a little tricky part in that case.
It's a bit different than that actually.
Exactly. That's possibly different, but
Any more question?
right? Please feel free to ask the questions if you have.
Yeah.
In this example, like the voting app, right? In a setup where the voting, I'm talking about like I said, go back 10 years, right? Pre-Aadhaar card system where there was no requirement of Aadhaar card, and let's say the Aadhaar card becomes mandatory for the voting, and then the data has to be somehow changed for the older voting to the new voting. So in that case, will it become an entirely separate application sort of thing?
So it's like syncing up previous data
Yeah,
with the new
yes,
one.
yes,
So
yes.
But previous data is a discrepancy.
The name discrepancy should be there.
It doesn't have discrepancy. It's like we're just making it more robust.
but then
Okay.
it would come up as complication, like who would add that data? That would again become the priority of one person or one node adding that.
Yeah. That's what
That would have other complications, and then who would be responsible for adding the previous data onto the
for bootstrapping the
No,
network.
but the previous data is already there. So what we're doing is like, will it become something like updating the data, but it will still become like another chain, like updating existing data and will make it, will keep track of, block will keep track of that. That
So
will
basically, you can
changed.
try updating the state of the previous one to match the current one. Like you can choose what you want to do. If you want to read the old data as, like if you have created an API that reads from your ledger, and if it's not able to read from the previous, then you would need some way to either make that into the current state, or you would have another API listening onto the previous one.
So this is like when this is the kind of thing that it's going to be kind of hacked.
Yeah, there's no elegant way of- So maybe it's a good time to think that whether or not it's a good idea to put this thing onto the blockchain. If you think it's gonna change.
Right.
So those decisions.
Those things might come. Yeah.
Putting like if you're creating a dApp, then even this decision is very important at what should go on that application on blockchain and what should not. Something.
All right, great. Thank you, Himanshu, and Navdeep. Thank you for your time and sharing your great knowledge. For a good example, I'm sure people have learned a lot of stuff from you folks. So once again, thank you very much for coming. This is the total from